This is Beth Brandenburg from the CuriousThoughtsofEB.com website. I created a new math routine to use with your students based on one of the talks that Dan Meyer gave. In his talk, he suggested that students often fail to really read a graph. They simply look for a question instead of really analyzing what a graph's really about. So he suggested taking graphs and eliminating information to have students really notice and wonder before they start asking and answering questions about the graph. So I've created a series of graphs that you could use in 10 to 15 minute warm-ups with your students. They're really intended for elementary age, anywhere from kindergarten up to grade 5, but I'm sure they could be extended beyond that. I've tried to give you a variety of different graphs as well. I'm going to show you when you open a file what you find. Here, for example, on the screen, you'll see an example of a line graph routine. The first screen is just the cover screen. But then you're going to see the first slide always asks students what they notice about the graph. And I've always taken away some sort of information to really get them to look at the data, to look at the labels. So this graph, for example, is about the cost of tickets at Disney. And so I would hope that students would notice things about the line itself. So simply spend a few minutes here asking your students to notice and wonder about what they see. I often will have students turn and talk to each other before sharing out. And sometimes I ask them to share out something their neighbor said or their partner said instead of something they thought of. The second slide asks them what they wonder. Well, I certainly hope that one of your students shares that they wonder what those costs are and what those years might be. And once they've done that, and that should take a few minutes, you'll expose the next graph. And you'll see I've started to add a little bit more information. On this graph, you have the years, but still no ticket cost. So I simply kind of give you the little prompt over here. What do you notice now? What do you think the cost might be? And of course, you want your students to explain their thinking. You could even have them jot down a little sentence to justify their thinking if you want. But really, in my mind, this is probably an oral type of routine because we do want it to be only 10 to 15 minutes. Again, you can have students turn and talk before they share out. The next screen always asks students what questions they could ask and answer about the graph. Really getting the kids to think about the questions that they might ask, but making sure that they're actually questions that you could answer given the graph. And the final slide, I always have one closed question that I pose just in case this question didn't come up. For example, here, between which 10 years did we see the largest increase in price? How much was the increase? A lot of times I will find with this routine that the students have already come up with that question before I've even put this slide up. So if they do come up with a question on the slide before, then I simply eliminate this one from the routine. So that's one example. Another example, just in time for the Super Bowl today, is this is a picture graph. It talks about the multiple Super Bowl wins since 1967, and the first graph on this particular one eliminates the team. So I think the kids will have a lot of fun with this one. Another graph that you might be interested in, given that it's sports time, is this viewership for championship games. With this one, you start without any of the sports, and then eventually it asks students to try to figure out which sport belongs with which bar and to justify their thinking. So I hope you enjoy these routines. There are many here. I will continue to add to them as the year goes along. Of course, you can create your own as well. You can simply copy one of mine and modify it if you want, or completely create your own from scratch. I find that it's best to use graphs that relate to things that my students are interested in. If you have any feedback or comments, I would love to hear about it. Just leave me a comment on my page. I hope you enjoy these routines. Thanks again.